Please take your seats. We're getting ready to begin. Please take your seats. Thank you all for being here tonight for our third and final meeting. I would like to call this meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. My name is Richard Gaines, and I am a member of the St. Louis Public Schools Special Administrative Board and the chair of the Special Committee on Governance reviewing the district's governance options. I would also like to recognize we have Rich Sullivan, who is also a member of the SAB in the back. Donetta Klinkscale is not here with us this evening due to a personal matter. Elected school board members Susan Jones, President. Ms. Jones, would you stand? Catherine Westling, Vice President. Natalie Vowell, Secretary. Charlie Cooksey, please stand. Elected board member and special committee task force member. Members Bill Haas, Dorothy Rhodey Collins, and Donna Jones. These are the members of the elected Board of Education. Also with us, this evening, we have a representative again, at least one, from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And are there any elected officials in the House? If you would please stand. And if you would, you're close to a mic, if you would identify who you are.
My name is Jesse Todd. I'm the 18th Ward Democrat Committee man.
Mavis Thompson, license collector for the City of St. Louis.
Marie Siselsky, 7th Ward Democratic Committee woman.
Thank you for being here tonight. The focus of tonight's meeting is on hybrid school governance boards and best practices for board transition, should that be decided. Before we begin tonight, I want to mention that we do have free child care services available during our meeting. If you want to take advantage of this service, please go to our registration table and you will be directed to the child care room. The primary purpose of this meeting, like the two previously held, is to inform the special committee as fully as possible on three possible models of school board governance: elected, appointed, and hybrid models. Armed with this information, the committee is charged with making a recommendation to the SAB for the most appropriate model for the St. Louis Public Schools moving forward. Like our other meetings, this meeting is being broadcast live on the district's Facebook page. The format for this meeting is as follows: a 30 to 35-minute presentation by the guest speaker, followed by questions from the special committee. Each committee member may ask up to 2 questions. Following that, we will take any and all questions and comments from the public. Those who wish to speak must sign in at the registration table, and we will call speakers in the order in which they signed in. Public comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and we have a timer up front that you can see and we can see. This time allowance will be strictly adhered to for the benefit of allowing everyone who wants to comment an opportunity to speak. Please know that this meeting will continue until all people who want to speak, publicly have spoken. Again, if you wish to speak publicly and you have not done so already, please sign up at the registration table. We will call your name in the order in which you signed in. If you do not wish to make a comment publicly, there are other ways to give your feedback. You can speak directly to a court reporter in the room right outside the door, complete the comment form you received when you signed in, and drop it in a comment box at the comment area on your way out. Type your comments on one of our iPads at the comment area, or call our hotline at 314-345-5755 and leave a voicemail message. Again, that number is 314-345-5755. If you want to tweet, we have a hashtag. It is hashtag SLPS governance. That's hashtag SLPS governance. And as of tonight, we now have live an online survey that will be available for you to take until midnight, November 28th. This survey comes at the end of our 3 meetings where you have had a chance, along with our special committee, to learn more about the 3 governance models, elected, appointed, and hybrid. The survey asks several questions about what is important to you when it comes to school board governance, your preferable governance model, and about the transition period. Should that be decided, the special committee, excuse me, strongly encourages you to take this online survey at slpsgovernance.metroquest.com. Again, the online survey is now live and will remain open until midnight on November 28th for the entirety of the region. Now, there have been some questions about how the data will be accumulated and reported to the community. To tell you more about this is Lorna Godwin, owner and president of Vector Communications, a nearly 20-year-old public engagement and communications consulting firm based in downtown St. Louis. Ms. Godwin.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines, and good evening, everyone. Vector Communications is honored to be the objective third-party public engagement firm for St. Louis Public School District's Board Governance Project. Our tasks have included and will include planning these meetings, developing and administering the online survey, data analysis, and report generation. As you know, we have provided several ways for you, the public, to give your input. During the public meetings, that has included speaking publicly before the special committee, and we have had a court reporter in the front of the room for every meeting, speaking privately to a court reporter in a nearby room, completing a comment form, commenting on Facebook Live, commenting on Twitter. Secondly, we have a hotline, as Mr. Gaines mentioned, that has been open, and that number is 314-345-5755. where callers can call in and leave their comments. The third and final input mechanism is our online survey that went live tonight and will remain live until midnight on Monday, November 28th. We will take the feedback that you have provided through all of these different mechanisms and compile this information. All of this verbatim information, word for word, meaning everything that has been said and recorded or documented, will be included in the final report in the appendices. In preparing the final report, we will summarize all the comments and we will identify themes that were heard and the preferences that people shared. The final report will be divided into these primary sections: the executive summary, then the public meeting comments, the hotline comments, the online survey comments, and the appendices, which again will have all the comments, the meeting sign-in sheets, etc. And this is a very important point to make, so make sure you please hear me. No one form of input has weight over another. Again, no one form of input has weight over another. That means the online survey comments do not count more than what was heard at the public meetings, and vice versa. All comments will be equally weighted. Our final comment summary report will be delivered to the special committee no later than Monday, January 8th, 2018. And the final report will be available on the SLPS website at slps.org/governance at the same time. Thank you. Mr. Gaines?
Thank you, Ms. Godwin. Now, before I introduce our speaker, I would like to take a minute to introduce our volunteer special committee. We call them task force. They are Mrs. Addie Bond, a parent of 3 elementary children in one of our district neighborhood schools. Ms. Charlie Cooksey, representing the St. Louis Elected School Board. Mr. Ray Cummings, representing the Teachers Union, AFT Local 420. Ms. Stephanie Hudson, an attorney and professor of law at St. Louis University and Lindenwood University. Pastor Mike Jones, senior pastor of Friendly Temple Baptist Church. Mr. Kalen Holloway, a teacher from Central Visual and Performing Arts High School. Mr. Rich McClure, retired president of Unigroup and former co-chair of the Ferguson Commission. Mr. David Meredith, a parent of 2 high school children in one of our district magnet schools. You might remember he's the one that called in. I said from California on Thursday. He was actually calling in Facebook streaming this thing in Texas. And Mr. Adolphus Pruitt, Executive Director of the St. Louis chapter of the NAACP. Thank you all for accepting this role without hesitation. Your work has the potential to impact generations of St. Louisans. And now I would like to introduce our speaker on the topic of hybrid board governance. I would also like to point out that all of the speakers' full biographical information, as well as detailed information about this process, is all available online at www.slps.org/governance. With that said, with us tonight we have Dr. Michael Casserly. Dr. Casserly is Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools. He has been in this position since 1992. As head of this urban school group, Dr. Casserly has unified big city schools nationwide around the vision of reform and improvement. Currently, he is spearheading efforts to boost academic performance in the nation's big city schools, to strengthen management and operations, and to improve the public's image of urban education. A USA Today article some years ago called him a crusader for urban schools. Dr. Casserly is a U.S. Army veteran and holds a PhD from the University of Maryland and a BA from Villanova University. And I would like to say, if you know anything about urban education in large schools, you would have to know something about Dr. Casserly. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Michael Casserly. Casserly.
Great, thank you very much, and good evening, everyone, and good evening to members of the Commission. I'm Mike Casserly, I'm the Executive Director of the Council of the Great City Schools. For those of you who don't know us very well, we are a coalition of 70 of the nation's largest big city school districts. On our board of directors is 1 school board member and the superintendent of schools from each city. The school board members on our board of directors are appointed board members, elected board members, and in a couple of cases, they're not represented by a board at all. The presentation that I'm going to make this evening, and I'll probably not be terribly lengthy, is based on research that we have done and others have done, including 2 major studies by our organization, one called Foundations for Success in 2002, another called Pieces of the Puzzle, published in 2011, on why and how some urban public school systems improve faster than others. extensive surveying of great city school boards around governance, relations with superintendents, committee structures, priorities, and how school boards spend their time, scores of strategic or support teams or technical assistance teams on general instruction, special education, and bilingual education, and the roles of the boards of education in the functioning of each. We also rely on an analysis of the trial urban district assessment of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, case studies of urban school districts around practices that lead to better student outcomes and what the board's role is in that progress. We've also looked at ongoing analysis of trends in student achievement on state tests, technical assistance provided to the council to its members, including its member school boards of all types, and decades of experience with major city school boards. In addition to being the exec of this organization for the last 25 years, I have been with the group for now 40 years and have known literally thousands of big city school superintendents and school board members in that 40 years of experience. In general, major urban school systems like St. Louis are often governed quite differently than most public school systems nationally. When you see appointed boards or no boards at all or hybrid boards, you will usually see them in cities. Part of this is a legacy of nearly 100 years ago when almost all boards of education were appointed ones, and partially the legacy of the reform movement over the last 20 or so years. Still, most urban boards in the big city school systems nationally are elected, but the mix of who is elected and who is appointed and who is hybrid has changed considerably over the years and continues to change. For instance, Detroit at one point was an elected board, then became an appointed board, then became an elected board, and then it was elected in a different way. New Orleans once was elected and then was appointed and is now going back to an elected board. Same with Newark. It was an elected board, was an appointed board, and is now going back to an elected board. Oakland was an elected board, then a hybrid board of both elected and appointed board members, and now is fully elected. Richmond, Virginia was approximately the same way. It was all appointed at one point by the city council and is now an elected board. Boston once had one of the largest elected boards in the country and now is fully appointed by the mayor. Cleveland once was elected and now is appointed. It is one of the unusual situations where they actually at one point had two superintendents at the same time. Jackson was an elected board. Jackson, Mississippi was an elected board at one point and is now appointed. Philadelphia was always an appointed board, but now is appointed in a different way than it used to be historically. And we all know about St. Louis. Bridgeport, which I have in the column here called hybrid, is really an elected board, except the mayor has the authority, unlike a lot of cities, to appoint vacancies, and it just so happens that there were 3 vacancies, and the mayor has filled them all, and they are now a functioning hybrid board of elected and appointed boards. DC and New York City are really unusual in the sense that they have no boards at all. The District of Columbia has a state board of education, but it has no direct governing authority over the local board of education. Instead, the city council, for all intents and purposes, acts as the school board, but there is no formal board of education as such. In New York City, there's also no elected board or appointed board that has any governing power. The board is simply advisory in nature. In Norfolk, which is kind of an appointed board, or is kind of a hybrid board, was appointed by the city council at one point, but now has 2 elected members, and they are transitioning to a fully elected board by the summer of 2018. In all, some 57 of the 70 urban school districts that comprise the Council of the Great City Schools membership, 57 or about 81% of those boards are elected in some way, shape, or form. Some 9 or about 13% have appointed boards, and another 4 or 6% are hybrid or have no boards whatsoever. Also, you should note, and I suspect it is with part of the Commission's charge, that the size of these boards has decreased rather substantially over the years. When I first started this work in the early 1970s, it was not unusual to have boards of upwards of 18 to 20 folks. At this point, the norm for school boards in the big cities is now at 7. And almost all of these boards, whether or not they are elected or appointed, these board members are typically staggered in their terms. That is, their terms are not all up at the same time. When boards are appointed, as you probably know, they can be appointed by a variety of actors. Baltimore is an interesting case in point where until just a few months ago, both the mayor and the governor had to agree on the appointees to the board in Baltimore City, which is the only such case that I know of any place in the country. Boston, Chicago, and Cleveland are all strictly mayoral appointed boards. Hawaii, with Honolulu, is an interesting case where the governor appoints, but it has to be with the input, advice, and consent of the state senate. Jackson, Mississippi is one like Cleveland, Chicago, and Boston that is appointed solely by the mayor. Unlike Baltimore, where the city, where the governor and the mayor actually have to agree on the appointees to the Baltimore board, Philadelphia has 3 members that are appointed by the governor and 2 members that are appointed by the mayor. And again, we all know about the St. Louis situation. As I said before, Norfolk was appointed at one point by the city council, and it is now in transition to be a fully elected board by this time next year. There are several kinds of hybrid boards, since I've been asked to speak mainly on hybrid boards. And there are essentially 4 kinds. One is school boards that have both elected and appointed members on them. Bridgeport is one, but it is actually only by accident because the mayor is filling a set of vacancies. And Norfolk, which is transitioning from an appointed board to an elected one. The only 2 other examples that I know of in big city school districts across the country historically were in Oakland, California, and DC, both of which at one point had both elected and appointed members on them. The second kind of hybrid board is school boards with members who are elected on both a citywide and a regional basis. Examples include Atlanta, Austin, Birmingham, Broward County, Florida, Buffalo, Hillsborough County or Tampa, Kansas City, Missouri, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle. This situation is actually pretty common. In fact, about 20 cities have school boards that have both members that are elected on a citywide basis and a regional or ward basis on their respective boards. The other elected boards are either all at large or all by geographic region. The third school board or hybrid type are members who are appointed by differing people. Examples of this, as I said, are Baltimore, Philadelphia, and right here in St. Louis. And then the fourth type, which is really not a hybrid board or an elected board, is a situation where there is no board at all. And again, New York City and the District of Columbia are examples of those, and they are the only 2 examples that I know of in all of the years that I've been doing this, at least in the big cities. The advantages and disadvantages of hybrid boards, particularly boards that are composed of both elected and appointed members are probably pretty obvious. The advantages of a hybrid board is that they ensure a political diversity of board members. They ensure that both city and regional interests are represented. It requires differing political interests to come to agreement on the appointments. And in cases where there are no boards at all, sometimes the administration finds that it can act faster when there is no governing authority at all. The disadvantages are also probably pretty obvious. The disadvantages of a hybrid board are that they risk not being able to reach consensus on a plan for reform and improvement. It sometimes ensures a divided or fractured interest in school board decision-making. Hybrid boards also have the potential to undermine public confidence in the board's ability to act if the board becomes deadlocked because of the hybrid nature of the board and the interests that they are serving. And again, in the case where there is no governing board at all, sometimes situations like that can undermine public input and public confidence, and it will sometimes squelch the public's desire to have a say over the nature of the schools and their operations. One should understand across all of these boards that each type of board, whether it's an elected board, an appointed board, or a hybrid board, doesn't necessarily work the same way in any given city over time. An example, Cleveland's mayoral appointed board has been effective in some cases, has been ineffective in other cases over time, depending on the mayor of the city. Makes perfect sense, but for those who would argue for a strictly mayoral appointed board, you'll see that the effectiveness of those boards can wax and wane depending on the agenda of the mayor, how strong the mayor is, what the mayor wants to do in his relationships with the community. On the other hand, Atlanta's elected board has also been more or less effective over time depending on who is being elected at any one election cycle. So both elected and appointed boards in the same cities will often change in their effectiveness depending on who is actually sitting in those seats. Hybrid elected and appointed boards, that is, boards that have both elected and appointed members on it, have consistently gotten themselves into trouble more often than either the elected boards or the appointed boards because of their divided loyalty. The same can be said sometimes with boards that are elected both by region and by ward or geographic area, simply because of the differing demands on their responsibilities. The truth of the matter is that there is no governance structure that is consistently effective for any one city, and there is no governance structure that appears inherently to produce better student performance than any other. You can see this from the following look at progress on the National Assessment of Educational Progress over time. This particular graph ranks cities by their progress in fourth grade reading, and you can see from this that the District of Columbia has the fastest improvement on National Assessment of Educational Progress in fourth grade reading, and Cleveland has the least. The District of Columbia, however, has no Board of Education. Atlanta, which is the second fastest improving, has an elected hybrid board. Chicago has a board that's appointed by the mayor. Boston has a board that's appointed by the mayor. Los Angeles has a hybrid elected board. San Diego has an elected board. Charlotte has an elected board. New York City has no board at all. Austin has a hybrid elected board. Houston has an elected board, and Cleveland has an appointed board. If you go to 8th grade reading and rank the cities there by how fast they improve, Los Angeles, again, has an elected board. Atlanta, a hybrid elected board. San Diego is elected. Chicago is appointed by the mayor. DC has no board. New York City has no board. Houston is elected. Boston is appointed. Austin is a hybrid elected board. Charlotte is elected. And Cleveland, as I said, is appointed. Kind of the same with fourth grade mathematics. District of Columbia, once again, the fastest improving of all of these cities, has no board, followed by Chicago, which is appointed, then Boston, which is appointed, Atlanta, which is hybrid elected, Houston, Los Angeles, San Diego, Charlotte, which are all elected in one way, shape, or form, New York City, which has no board, Cleveland, which is appointed, and Austin, which is hybrid. Just to drive this point home a little bit further, take a look at 8th grade mathematics progress over time. Atlanta, again, hybrid. Chicago, appointed. Boston, appointed. Los Angeles, elected. San Diego, elected. DC, no board, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's not much pattern to any of these results, whether or not you're looking at reading or mathematics, 4th grade or 8th grade. No pattern really that is discernible to me when it comes to board structure. If you look at results by structure, you see pretty much the same mixed pattern. And here, take a look at 4th grade reading. These are according to National Assessment of Educational Progress data, which is all comparable from city to city. You can see that between 2003 and 2015, the average city with an elected board gained about 8 points on NAEP in 4th grade reading, and the average appointed board gained about 12 points. Well, if you looked only at that, you'd say, gee, the appointed boards really have had the edge here. Except then you go to 8th grade reading, and you see that the average elected board gained about 9 points, and the average appointed board gained about 5. Same kind of mixed patterns when you go to mathematics in the 4th grade, and the average elected board gained 8 points, and the average appointed board gained 14 points. Then you go to 8th grade mathematics, and in that case, both the elected and appointed boards showed exactly the same amount of improvement in mathematics from 2003 to 2015. What to make of that? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So what to make of that? Because the data doesn't seem to suggest that one structure has any great advantage over any other structure. Well, the truth of the matter is that urban school districts show the most improvement when there's a series of interlocking themes that are built around student achievement and how the Board of Education, be it elected, appointed, or hybrid, adds value to that priority and how it is they shape whether or not academic progress for students is continuing. Progress is less about the structure of the board than it is about what the board is doing and how it is they relate to the administration and what the relationships are between the Board of Education and members of and the superintendent. We've spent, as an organization, a great deal of time trying to figure out why some urban school systems improve faster than others. And part of the research that we've done really involves whether or not it makes a difference, whether or not you have an appointed board or an elected board or some combination of the both. But the themes that we have found that actually make a difference in whether or not the kids are doing any better really revolve around these 7 themes: leadership and governance, goal setting, accountability, the strategy for improving the district, the instructional program of the district, the district's ability to raise the capacity of its people to do the work, and the data that it uses. Let's look at some of these in detail, because what I'm essentially doing here is asking the question, why do some urban school districts improve faster than others, and work my way backwards, and in doing that, ask the question, what did the boards have to do with it? Did the boards really matter? Well, as it turns out, the boards really do matter. Leadership matters, and progress in the fastest improving urban school districts occur when leadership and governance of the school district has a clear vision that is shared by the school board and the superintendent of where the district is going and why it's going there. The board and the superintendent have a coherent theory of action that is built around a clear understanding of the district's capacity and where it is in the improvement process. The board and the superintendent are working together to accomplish the same goals, and the relationship between the board and the superintendent is very close with one another in sharing these goals. There is stable leadership at both the Board of Education and the superintendent level. The joint action of the school board and the superintendent is defined around improving student achievement and other outcomes for students. And the work of the board and the superintendent around student achievement is sustained over an extended period of time. I don't know of a single urban school district anywhere in the country that has shown improved student achievement over an extended period of time where either the school board or the superintendent or both turns over every couple of years. It never happens. When elected boards become too fractured, by the way, you should know that when elected boards become too fractured, to create the kind of coherence that I'm talking about in terms of leadership, then they are often replaced by appointed boards, as you saw here in St. Louis a few years ago. And appointed boards, in some cases, are appointed simply to create a sense of coherence around leadership and governance. But elected boards can be just as coherent and provide just as much leadership, although I have to say it is sometimes harder to sustain over time. Good examples of elected boards of education that sustained their improvements over time with pretty much the same superintendent, same school board members all elected were Long Beach, California, and Denver, Colorado. But hybrid boards have a consistently harder time in creating coherence than either elected boards or appointed boards, simply because the board members take their seats having come from a vastly different perspective, and the accountability systems can sometimes be different. Another distinguishing characteristic of big city school systems that shows substantial improvement involves their focus on a set of jointly set and clearly articulated and understood and agreed upon set of goals. Goals that are stated and clearly stated and that reflect the values and priorities of the community. Academic goals that are stated in terms of student outcomes and not program inputs and reflect high expectations. Goals where there's agreement on the evidence that will be used to determine whether there's progress on those goals. Goals and key performance indicators are regularly monitored by the school board. There's a consistent focus on the board or on the goals. The board isn't distracted and doesn't distract the administration from the original goals that it set by chasing some other moment-to-moment set of strategies. The goals had the ability to rally an internal and external set of stakeholders around a vision for improvement with strong buy-in and clear communications from the board and the superintendent to the public. And the board is clear on what it doesn't want to have happen by the administration in pursuit of these goals. The third major theme around these faster improving urban school districts also involves the issue of accountability. And by that I mean an identifiable mechanism, either administratively or culturally. It doesn't have to be a hard and fast accountability system like used to find under No Child Left Behind, but an accountability system that in some way, shape, or form holds staff responsible for progress on the academic goals that the board and the superintendent have set. accountability that starts with the superintendent and the school board and is built around the goals and forms the basis of the superintendent and the board's evaluation. Accountability that includes central office staff before defining it at the school or the classroom level, and accountability for principles that are defined around and roll up to a set of district-wide goals. The next kind of basic theme to these faster improving urban school districts is the strategy that they follow. Typically, these districts that show substantial improvement in student outcomes are districts that have a broad strategy for improving student achievement district-wide. That is, if they want to improve at scale, they act at scale. Second, these are districts that have a clear and effective approach for turning around chronically low-achieving schools, and the district has academic programming in place that addresses the needs of students that are falling behind. That is, poor students, English language learners, struggling readers, and the like. And then finally, these are districts that are able to gauge its personnel capacity and the achievement level of the students in a way that effectively defines what its theory of action for improving student achievement should be. Next, these urban school districts that show substantial improvement in student achievement also have a coherent and uniform district-wide curriculum that is built around rigorous standards, not programs. A curriculum that is clear about what should be taught and at what level of conceptual understanding. A curriculum that articulates instructional coherence within and across grades on how concepts are built and how they progress over time. A clear articulation of what high-quality instruction looks like, materials that are aligned to standards in the curriculum and supplemented where gaps exist, classroom instruction at grade level every day, clearly defined interventions for students who are falling behind academically, regular progress monitoring and feedback mechanisms, and full access to the curriculum for all students. Next to last, these school districts that show substantial improvement in student outcomes involves capacity building. These are districts that have an ongoing process for bolstering the capacity of its people to do the work. That involves professional development, professional learning communities, coaching, etc. These districts have capacity building that is defined primarily around the academic goals and priorities of the district, professional development that is differentiated by personnel experience, skills, and student needs. Capacity building activities are tracked and evaluated for how well they are implemented and how effective they are at improving student outcomes. Effective staffing that can be identified, effectively deployed, and retained, and the quality of student work and the instruction that leads to it are part of the capacity building process. Finally, these districts that show substantial improvement in student achievement have assessments of student learning that are explicitly aligned to the standards and the curriculum in terms of both content and rigor. Their data systems allow the school board and the leadership team to track progress on district goals and priorities. Data systems are accessible and provide information by district, school, student grouping, and students. Assessments provide data in a way that will help personnel interpret results and inform instruction, and data that are specific enough to inform the deployment of professional development and interventions. And I define data here not by tests, but by any evidence of student work that demonstrates what it is that they can do and what it is that they know. All of these components, leadership, goal setting, accountability, strategy, instructional programming, capacity building, and data have to fit together systemically to move an urban school system forward. But everything starts with the board. With the board's work, the board's involvement in that improvement in student achievement involves their ability to articulate and set a vision and a set of goals for academic performance, the board's ability to accurately reflect the values and priorities of the community, The superintendent it hires, the culture and expectations it sets, the signals it sends to staff and the community about what it considers important and how it engages the community, the focus of its work and how the board uses its time, the sustainability of its focus, and its ability through its monitoring process to keep the administration focused on results for students. I think the facts show, in general, that an elected board that doesn't focus on student outcomes, that its chances of making progress are much smaller than an elected board that, that has a different approach to student achievement. Likewise, and if an appointed board or a hybrid board doesn't focus on student outcomes, then its chances of making progress on them are also smaller. The bottom line is that if board members, elected, appointed, or hybrid, have gotten to their positions to settle scores, to represent a special interest, to tell the superintendent how to run the district, or how to get contracts for their friends, then that board can be assured of being dysfunctional in a short amount of time, whether they are appointed, elected, or hybrid. And believe me, over 40 years, I've seen plenty of dysfunctional boards. When the board becomes dysfunctional, and it happens to any board of any type, the district's chances of success for its students are severely limited. On the other hand, when it defines its work around students, works in partnership with the superintendent on that priority, and sustains it over time, there is a much higher likelihood of progress. What's more important here than the structure of the school board is what the school board does to further the district's work to improve student achievement. Generally, an elected board is preferable in terms of public representation, but they can easily descend into factional politics that are not in the interests of students, no matter what the rhetoric is to the contrary. Appointed school boards can often find agreement more easily in the short run and accelerate the work of the administration, but sometimes appointed boards begin to act like appointed boards over time when they are allowed to represent special interests and not the welfare of the district as a whole or the students of the district. The track record of hybrid boards in general, I have to say, is typically poor, particularly when the term hybrid board means a combination of elected and appointed board members. That is a structure that, by and large, members of the commission, that does not work. It is the board's focus, in conclusion, on student achievement, sustained partnership with the administrative leadership around that priority, and the clarity of the roles about what the board's duties and responsibilities are and how it is they are separate from the administration and the superintendent that are key to an elected or to an effective board, whether it is elected, appointed, or hybrid. So with that, I'll conclude my formal remarks and open it up to any questions that the commission might have. I know that wasn't rousing and motivational, but I tried to give you the facts.
Before we go into questions from the task force, I'd like to recognize, which I didn't do, although he's been here longer than I have this evening, is Dr. Adams is sitting in the back. Dr. Adams. Now we will go to the second part of the meeting, in which questions will be asked of Dr. Casserly by the panel. Reverend?
Doctor, we appreciate your study and information. I have a question. I don't think I heard this being addressed, and I wondered if there's an area of board development with whether appointed, hybrid, or elected. Have you seen a process where there is development and it has helped the process of learning?
It's a great, great question, and one that where there's not a terribly satisfactory answer, in the sense that the professional development that is available to most big city boards is often not very good. There is professional development that is available through various state board associations or school boards associations and the like, but it's often not tailored to big city or urban school systems, and it tends to be a bit more basic in nature. One of the things that my organization has been trying to do is to develop a different kind of model for professional development, because there is not very good PD available to most urban boards, but it is a work in progress. So I have to say that the professional development that is available to most big city school boards is typically weak, and not, and that weak professional development is universally available, but there is a real dearth of really strong ongoing professional development for most urban boards, unfortunately.
Follow-up, Reverend? Mr. Meredith.
I had a question about your progress charts where we talked about the gains from appointed boards versus elected boards. There's a column on here as well talking about the scale scores.
Yeah.
And looking at the average of those scale scores. Can you talk about the difference between those? Because it looks like they're fairly similar numbers.
Yeah, the column of numbers on the left-hand side, which are the scale scores, are basically the raw scores on the National Assessment of Educational Progress for that subject and grade just for 2015. The column to the right is the progress or the difference between the scale scores in 2003 and the scale scores in 2015. So it denotes the progress or lack of progress of any individual board. And the point of that table is to show that, frankly, you don't see much pattern between elected or appointed boards in terms of who shows the most progress.
Mr. Holloway?
Yes. Your data show that there's not much, success with hybrid boards. You made that very clear in your conclusion. If that's the case, what drives the very few districts to want to consider or even adopt a hybrid board?
Well, most districts now have gotten away from hybrid appointed and elected. The only two cases that are that way at the moment, one Bridgeport and the other Norfolk, happen to be kind of artifacts of a transition. So in Bridgeport's case, it's really an elected board, but again, the mayor has the authority to appoint open seats on that board, and it just so happens that there were 3 open seats on that board, so the mayor appointed 3, which then made it a hybrid appointed and elected board, but it was an accident. In the case of Norfolk, they are transitioning from an appointed board to an elected board. They currently have 2 appointed boards, but they'll go all elected by the summer of 2018. Any board historically that has a combination of elected and appointed discovers rather quickly that there is an almost unresolvable tension between the appointed members and the elected members, because they are serving 2 different constituencies, and their ability to form a consensus around improvement becomes that much harder to do. So that kind of hybrid board has often been found not to work, and people have moved away from it. Now, the issue about hybrid boards where there are 2 different kinds of elected board members, that is, some at large and some that are elected by ward or region of the city, tend to be more common. They typically run into some of the same problems, however. That is, board members who are elected at large typically have a broader perspective on the nature of the cities, ones that are elected by ward or region tend to have a more dedicated and somewhat narrower view of what it is their constituency is and what their responsibilities are to the school system. Sometimes that also causes tension, even though it's a fairly common phenomenon.
Ms. Hudson.
So you've kind of already answered it, but just to make sure I have a clear understanding, you know, in your presentation, you point out that there are, every model that you've pointed out has issues with fragmentation and, you know, lack of cooperation in instances between members. And so I guess my question is just making sure that I understand, you know, of those three models, which model is most effective in a way, for lack of better phrasing, of self-righting those issues in a quick and efficient manner. So, you know, obviously you have to take into consideration if it's, you know, appointed or elected terms and so on and so forth, but what model most effectively and quickly self-rights itself when those fractions appear?
Let me answer your question just about the question you ask and
Okay.
not something else. Of all of the models that are the most self-correcting is probably an appointed one, because for instance, if the mayor is doing the appointing, he or she either calls those people in and says, get on the same page, or he or she replaces the board member who's not on the same page, so there's more coherence. That process can actually happen fairly quickly. So if the question is, which of all of these models writes itself most quickly, it's probably an appointed board. Now, appointed boards have other downsides to them, and elected boards have other advantages to them. But if the question is, which one can self-correct or have somebody correct for them, it's probably an appointed board.
So can I ask a follow-up question then? Then for your elected boards, what are the strategies that those boards use to self-correct? And I guess I'm not asking so much about hybrid boards, because if I understand you correctly, it seems that the hybrid boards, maybe there just aren't good examples where they've done that yet. So if there are, it'd be interesting to know, but what do elected boards do to self-correct?
I think the most effective strategy for hybrid or for elected boards, when there is not somebody like the mayor who's appointed them and can call them in and read them the riot act or something like that, is for the board itself, again, a little bit like I was describing earlier, develops a clear vision and set of goals in combination with the superintendent that focuses their work. And the board has a set of procedures and rules by which it calls into question any time it gets distracted from those goals. And the board has a mechanism by which it can call individual board members on the carpet, not necessarily publicly, but it has a mechanism for kind of self-correcting individual board members who may get distracted from the goals. But typically what happens with a lot of elected boards is that if they are not focused around the academic performance of the kids, and that's not their number one priority, and they let politics, adult issues, budgets, contracts, all kinds of other issues get in the way of what it is they are supposed to be focused on, then they have a very difficult time self-correcting, because at that point the board becomes just political. When the board, on the other hand, is focused on the kids, their well-being, their academic outcomes, and work with the administration around that priority and spend a good part of their meetings monitoring how the district is doing on the goals that it sets and the indicators that it has determined it's going to accept as evidence of progress, then those are boards that that either self-correct more quickly or they don't need to self-correct because they're already focused. Does that help? It's a longer answer than just saying the appointed boards self-correct faster, but the elected boards, when they get themselves into trouble, they've got to bring themselves back, and this is usually the role of the board president, to ensure that members of the board stay focused on what their goals actually are. I sense a follow-up question.
Very quickly, I won't ask a second
Okay.
question, I promise. Is there, are there any?
Was that clear?
It is, I just want to.
It's hard.
No, I agree. Are there any statistics which show of the elected boards, the ratio of those which successfully self-correct and those which don't? And then that's my final question.
Is there evidence?
Not so much evidence, but a ratio, like 60-40. 60% of boards can successfully self-correct, 40% of elected boards cannot. I don't know if that exists, but.
I'd say that most boards, elected boards, who get into a situation where they've gone off track often don't self-correct at all. I'd say it was the minority of elected boards who, once they get off track, and even if they had a set of goals, start to go off track into politics and jobs and contracts and all of that. It's the minority of boards that get themselves back on track. Sometimes they can do it by professional development, by somebody who is willing to speak directly to them about what the nature of the issues are, but it's very hard for the boards to do it kind of on their own. And when that happens, that's when, and they can't self-correct, they can't get back on track, they can't get out of their own way. This is the point at which you see the governor or the state legislature or the mayor starting to say, pox on all your houses, we're going to get rid of you and go to an appointed board.
Thank you.
Ms. Cooksey has a follow-up. She is out of turn.
Yes.
I guess I'm seeking clarity on the idea of self-correct or what self-right means and how much it's possible, or what are the nuances of an appointed board self-correcting, or how much of it is influenced by the mayor appointing people who support the mayoral agenda and them just course-correcting to be reminded, oh, this is why I was on this appointed board. So I guess I'm wondering how much
You're asking about appointed boards in particular?
Well, I feel like it's hard to compare and contrast an elected board self-correcting versus appointed board self-correcting because they were put in positions under different situations and contexts.
Right, and appointed boards typically have, they are accountable to whoever it is did the appointing, typically the mayor. And the mayor has the authority to appoint and unappoint in most cases, so that self-correcting becomes a lot faster and a lot more direct. In the case of the elected board, you don't have an ultimate authority unless the state legislature or the governor or somebody else comes in and says, get your act together or we're going to get rid of you. So in those cases, the elected board, either through a consultant or professional development or some other process, has to figure out its way to get back on track pretty much by itself. The best way to handle this situation is for an elected board not to get off track in the first place, and the best way to do that is to be sure that that elected board has a clear set of goals and indicators that assess progress on those goals, and the board's work is really monitoring what the administration is doing to make progress on those goals. But once an elected board gets off track because it's starting to turn political, it becomes difficult, not impossible, but just difficult to kind of right itself.
Mr. Rich McClure.
Thank you. Do you have any data on superintendent tenure under different kinds of governance structures? You made a strong point about stability and sustaining a common vision between a board and a superintendent.
Yeah.
Could you share with us any data?
Yeah,
here?
typically the tenure of the superintendents under an appointed board is somewhat longer, and it was one of the arguments that advocates of appointed boards had originally made for appointed boards, and that is that the superintendent's tenure would last for at least as long as the tenure of whoever was doing the appointing of the board would last. But as that has played out over time, sometimes the tenure of the mayors, which typically do the appointing, sometimes isn't that much longer than a single term, which means that the superintendents that they appointed don't have tenures that last much longer than the mayor itself does. Now, that sometimes can be like 4 years, something of that nature, but you know, if for some reason the mayor gets himself in trouble, then that trouble accrues to the superintendent, accrues to the board. But there's a slight tendency for superintendents under an appointed board to have a longer, somewhat longer tenure, but it can be defined by the political lifespan of the mayor himself.
So a follow-up would be, if there is, you may not have it, Harry. What does somewhat mean? Is it 2 years, half a year?
No, I think it's maybe a year.
Okay, if you've got backup data, it would be
Yeah,
helpful to have.
I've got the data.
Thank you.
And I can figure it out, and I'd be happy to provide the task force with it.
Mr. Pruitt.
You outlined some distinguishing characteristics that you said were critical and necessary for the improvement of urban districts. And you went over all, I think it was 5 or 6 of them. So my question is there a tool or assessment that you know of to assess whether it's appointed or elected, whether those characteristics exist? And 2, will that mechanism will it also provide a means for tracking those boards, whether appointed or elected, to ensure that those characteristics continue to exist, or to tell if they are starting to erode?
Yeah. My point in giving you those 5 or so characteristics was to point out that, by and large, why some urban school districts improve the academic performance of their kids really has precious little to do with the actual structure of the board, that is, the appointed nature or the elected nature. It has everything to do with how the board acts as a body, and whether or not that board is an active partner in all of those 5 things: the instructional program, the accountability system, professional development and capacity building, and the like. So it's my point in articulating those things was to make sure that the task force, your commission, knows that even though you have a very, very critical and important charge in front of you to articulate what the structure of the board is going to be, what I'm trying to do is to underscore the fact that it's how the board that you name, or the structure that your board names, how those board members actually act, and how they act in furtherance of student performance, that really makes the difference.
Yeah, but in this particular instance,
it is somewhat fairly easy to maybe try to apply those characteristics to the appointed board because they're the ones who are interacting with the superintendent and some of those other things. We have a elected board that does not have that latitude. So,
No, my point is that you can get all of those characteristics through either an appointed board or an elected board. There are elected boards that provide just as much coherence, priority on student achievement, strong relations with their superintendents, and a clear, unified vision for what the district's theory of action is going to be to improve student achievement. Again, good examples of that are Long Beach, California, and Denver, Colorado. So you don't have to have an appointed board to get those things. You can get them through an elected board.
I understood that much. Again, I'm asking, if you wanted to make an assessment of whether those characteristics exist within one structure or the other presently, is there a mechanism, is there a tool, is there an assessment to look at what exists now to see if those characteristics are in place, with the exception of interaction with, maybe not, but I would think with the exception of interaction with the superintendent and some of the other things, because we have a board that doesn't have the latitude to do that and hasn't had it, and we have one that does, so, you know.
Yeah, there are such things. They're not forms as such. They're a set of process tools by which questions are asked of how all of the components of the themes that I mentioned, how those are actually playing out on the ground. So there are processes that do exist to assess whether or not a school district's behavior comports with the themes that I articulated.
And can you share those with us?
I sure will.
For her, first, almost second time, Ms. Cooksey.
You gave an extensive list of appointed boards that are now transitioning back to becoming elected boards. Why have so many appointed boards returned or are on the path of returning to the elected board governance structure?
Typically, when a board had changed from an elected board to an appointed board, it was because the elected board had got itself into trouble, either financial trouble, academic trouble, people were corrupt, or any number of other things, or all of those things at the same time. And some higher power dissolved their authority as an elected board and installed an appointed board in their place. Typically, through the Voting Rights Act of '64, there is a sunset provision on many of those appointed boards. So they will, they terminate after a certain period of time, usually decided or articulated when they were put into place in the first place, by which a body like yours decides whether or not to stick with that appointed board. And in some cases, a commission like this will stick with an appointed board because they see it making progress for their district. In other cases, they go back to an appointed or an elected board. Interestingly enough, sometimes they flip-flop. Detroit was a perfect example of that, where they went from appointed to elected to appointed, back to elected, and then they changed how they were elected to see if they could get a better collection of people on the school board. So for boards that are transitioning from appointed to elected, it's typically because there was some kind of sunset provision in the original agreement that named the appointed board that said at date certain a decision would be made whether or not to stick with that appointed board or to go back to an elected one.
So I have a follow-up question. It sounds like perhaps the elected boards that then became appointed boards, quite a few of them, there were mandates for them to become appointed boards temporarily with the intention that it would one day return to an elected board. And do you have the data on what percentage of the appointed boards, whether it's legislation or whatever, had the intention for it to return to an elected board?
Probably half of them, I
Thank
would
you.
guess. So, but some
Can you
boards.
share that data with us?
Sure.
Okay.
Some boards have been appointed boards for almost as long as you can imagine. Philadelphia was like that. Chicago is like that. New York City, at one point, they don't have an appointed board anymore that has any governance authority. But before Mayor Bloomberg, that board was appointed, I think, 2 members by the mayor and the rest by the borough president.
Mr. Cummings.
Thank you. I'd like to propose a new rule. The older people should get to answer their questions first, because I sat up here so long, I'm forgetting what I'm getting ready to ask.
Yeah, as an older person myself, I'm in complete agreement with your.
Thank you. Okay, but I remembered, I wrote it down. I know you said that more important than the structure, there are certain characteristics, if you will. There's been a lot of analysis done around looking at affected boards and what those characteristics are. I believe the Center for Public Education, they call theirs 8 characteristics or something like that. You refer to them as why some urban school systems improve faster than others. And my question is...
Yeah, and
okay.
There are people who just study boards and come up with criteria around why some boards are effective and other boards aren't. Our question tends to be a broader one, and that is, why do some urban school districts do better than others? Why do some show more improvement than others, and what's the board's role in that?
And aside from one being better than the other and what they really looked at, that's the thing what you guys, when you do your analysis and all that, you go through. But what my question is, there's general agreement that there are a certain set of characteristics by which if boards conduct themselves, urban or otherwise, they can be effective. And you outlined what yours were right here. And when I read them over, or I read their 8 characteristics, it's not that it's rocket science, it's what's a part of that. So what my question is, why after 20 or more years do we have such weak professional development and time hasn't been put in trying to come up with stronger professional development to try and ensure that these boards have these characteristics?
It's a great question, and I think the blame for it falls at the feet of all kinds of people, including an organization like mine who hasn't, developed that kind of training fast enough for boards, in part because it took us a while to figure out what was ailing so many of these boards and why some urban school districts were not improving as fast as others were. One thing that we didn't want to do is to train people on the wrong stuff or train people on things that were largely irrelevant to whether or not they were going to be effective. So, I'll accept part of the responsibility for my own organization for not developing that kind of professional development fast enough, but there's probably enough responsibility and blame to go around for others as well. But the truth of the matter is that as we are now figuring this out, some of us are getting to a place where we are testing new models of professional development for a number of cities. So I'm currently doing professional development in Greensboro, North Carolina, in Pittsburgh, we've done some in Anchorage, Alaska. We're going to be doing some in Broward County, Florida, kind of trying out new models for what training could be around what makes urban school districts more effective and what the board's role in that larger picture actually is.
My follow-up on that is, you probably got that on the shelf now, right? A good, strong professional development.
For boards, we kind of do, but we're tweaking it and testing it and modifying it with every set of professional development for every board that we do. So we're constantly refining what works and what doesn't work in strengthening the nature of the board around adding to student achievement and adding to the value that the board brings to the work. So we have something on the shelf that we are constantly modifying to see if we can get a model that is more consistently applied by members that we do training for.
As St. Louis being a member of Great City Schools,
would we do some of that? Sure, of course.
Can we be on that list?
Yes.
Of people?
Sure.
To get that professional development?
Yep, and there's no cost to it.
Well, that sounds really good.
So.
Thank you.
Ms. Bond.
So you've mentioned quite a few school districts that have gone through transition, and that is something that we are charged with, is thinking about the transition that we would go through. And I'm wondering if you can speak to successful transition models that you've seen, or provide us with some districts that have made successful transitions that we could look at.
Yes, I understood that this question was going to be asked, and I thought about it all day and racked my brain about what an effective transition model actually looks like, or what city had actually done a successful transition. And I have to say I'm largely drawing a blank because most cities that move from an elected to an appointed, or an appointed to an elected, or some other transition in the governance structure provide very little transition, almost no professional development, and it's typically done with no thought about the sequence of it. So in a lot of ways, this task force has a real opportunity to articulate what an effective transition might look like, but you're not going to find too much in the way of models to rely on to help you do it. The one thing that these transitions typically involve is, because the board members are usually staggered in their terms, they're transitioning out people as their terms expire, then replacing them with another kind of a board member. And that transition can sometimes take years. And the board isn't necessarily any better off after those years worth of transition than they were before. It could be, but it might simply be because of the nature of the people. I honestly think that there is a more thoughtful transition process to be had that involves articulating not only the roles and responsibilities of a board, just the basic guts of what a board does and what a board doesn't do and how it differs from the administration, but more effective professional development on what the board's role is in setting the tone, the direction, the culture, and the goals of the school district, and how it is you actually do that and stick with it, and what tools you need to have at your disposal to make all of that happen. It's that kind of transition that I think would be a lot more effective than this kind of accidental swapping out of people without any more than just a rudimentary set of training on what the legal roles and responsibilities of a board member are. So, but I do think you have an interesting and unique and rather historic opportunity to do something that nobody else has really done.
Mr. Meredith, for the second time.
I actually wanted to go back to a question Ms. Hudson had asked earlier when you had talked about self-correcting boards. So our understanding is about 96% of the boards in the country are elected. I imagine a lot of them have gone through ups and downs with politics and gone off the rails, as you phrased it. For me, that's what the elections of new board members would be, the self-correcting. The parents would be able to elect new board members, or constituents would. Why, in your opinion, if I can't foresee the ups and downs only occurring in urban settings, why is it only in the urban settings that the state or a higher entity steps in to take over the elected?
It's a great question, and one that has frustrated me a great deal over the years. You know, part of it is politics at the state level and how the states and the cities interact with one another. There's a racial politics that's involved in this situation, to be sure. Because it's not like there are dysfunctional boards in the suburbs and the small towns and the small in the rural areas. But there's obviously larger number of kids at stake in the big cities than there are in any smaller community. And a combination of forces will often compel the state to act on the cities in ways that are different than they act towards anybody else. And you can see that in Missouri as well as you can see it in almost any other state. The truth is when boards in smaller communities go off the rails, sometimes the state doesn't notice or doesn't care and doesn't feel like it has any particular stake in the matter whatsoever. But you know probably as well as anybody else, and I suspect everybody in the audience knows, that the state will do to the cities what it will not do to almost anybody else.
Thank you.
Anybody disagree?
Mr. Pruitt,
Yeah,
for the second
actually, it's a
time.
two-part question.
Is that number 3?
Yeah, well, no. One, on these boards, did any of them you know of have term limits on how long or how often people can serve on them? And then more importantly, did any of them or any of them operating up under any desegregation court orders or consent decrees of any kind, any nature?
The answer to the first question is there are some boards that have term limits on them. I didn't bring that information with me, but I have it. So I can send that to the task force as well. So it's not the norm, that is setting term limits on elected board members, but it does exist. So let me just write it down. On desegregation, it's probably the big city school districts more than any other type of school district in the country that is most likely to have been under some kind of desegregation order, whether it's a consent decree or a court order, than almost any other kind of public school system in the country. So the order that St. Louis was under for a long period of time.
Still is.
Yeah, is the norm in many districts. Even if they were declared unitary, they're often still court monitored.
And how did the boards perform? I mean, based on your experience, how have they been performing under those, appointed or otherwise?
I think there's probably no particular correlation between how it is they perform and whether or not they're under a court order. So in some big cities, I think the board and maybe even the superintendent see the court order as a way to accomplish some things in the name of equity that they wouldn't otherwise be able to accomplish without the court's presence. Some people, welcome that presence more so than in other cases, but I'd say all of the characteristics of effective boards that we talked about earlier, those exist with boards that have been under court orders and boards that have not.
Yeah, and one other quick point, and you talked about the self-correcting. There's a lot of talk about it. But wouldn't the size of the board, whether appointed or elected, have a direct impact on whether they are self-correcting and at what speed they do that than anything else?
The size of the board?
Yeah, wouldn't that maybe more of a factor than anything else?
Yeah, at this point, the size of the boards don't have much variation to them anymore. They used to. You see a small number of 5-member boards that are both elected and appointed. The norm is 7 members, and you see a few boards that are 9 members. I don't even think we have any 11-member elected boards. We used to have 13, 15, 17 member elected boards, but at this point there's not much difference between a 7-member and a 9-member board. I frankly think a 5-member board's a little too small.
That's not my question. My question was, you said that appointed boards seem to be able to self-correct faster and had a higher propensity to do that. And I'm saying most appointed boards are smaller than elected boards. So wouldn't you think the size of the board?
That's not.
That's not the truth.
That's not actually the case. I think if I lined up the elected boards and the appointed boards and averaged the size out, that they'd be approximately the same.
I'm going to take a little liberty right there. In 1983 to 89, I served in St. Louis on a 12-member elected board. And when the legislation was being developed that led to the changeover from 12 to 7, we were, a group that I belonged to was involved in the negotiations there. And the major challenge was whether or not it should be 7 or 5. And it was decided 7 from the standpoint of the negotiation, and that did have an impact and an involvement with the desegregation order that was being settled at that time. Mr. Cummings.
Thank you, Mr. Gaines. Professor, I'm not the brightest bulb on the tree by any means, but something you said just kind of turned up my light a little bit. You said that we have dysfunctional boards in rural areas that either they don't get noticed or nobody cares to take them over. But in cities, many of which are predominantly people of color, and this whole business of voting and all of that, could you go back to that and give me a little greater understanding of where you were going? Because you just said, oh, well, they got more kids in the city, but we know they got a big budget in the city of millions of dollars. Or they're just not interested in these smaller places because they may fall off the earth there. Could you enlighten me on that?
Yeah, I think there's lots of factors that go into this, and it really depends on which community you're talking about and which state that is involved. But when I mentioned that it's hard not to notice that there's a racial component to this, obviously the demographics in the cities are much different from the demographics of other school districts any place else in the state, and are often really quite different from the state itself. There sometimes are state interests that would like to get its hands on either the money, the power, the number of people that are under the aegis of a big city. At the same time, There's also an issue about whether or not the city has been effective in teaching the kids in the city. So there's a whole lot of kind of conflicting interests that are likely involved in a state's interest in taking over a big city school system that doesn't necessarily exist when it comes to a smaller school district that doesn't have the money, the power, the clout, the visibility, and the numbers in it. Again, it's hard to miss the fact that you often have one set of folks taking over another set of folks, but this is why the Voting Rights Act applies in these appointed situations, because elected boards are being eliminated and the voting rights of the populace is being disenfranchised. So that's why there's often sunset provisions on these appointed boards. So it's a way in which federal law protects the rights of people in the cities to elect their own representatives, even if they're dysfunctional.
Excellent questions, excellent answers. We're now going to transition, if you will, to questions from the audience. If you are interested in making a public comment, it is absolutely necessary that you sign up outside at that respective area.
I've never known the people of St. Louis to be shy.
We will now start with Irma Nebels, Jesse Todd, and Lou Moy, in that order.
Good afternoon. My question that I have for you is, in your study, the elected and appointed board, did you find that which board had the most concern for its retired school personnel?
I don't think there was any relationship between the concern of school board members with retirees that had anything to do with their elected or appointed nature. I think you'll find elected boards that are concerned, other elected boards that have no concern whatsoever, and the same way with appointed boards. I think it has to do with who's on those boards, how it is they got there, and what the priorities are that they jointly agree to.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have an appointed board, and I have been retired since 2005. And the last cost of living that was given to the employees of the St. Louis Public School was in 2006, which we have a very good functioning pension board system. But for some reason, the appointed school board does not feel that the educators or the employees of this system deserves any type of recognition. I'm saying that the appointed board should make use of their retired educators as mentors to help the young ones coming in, because the teacher, even though you say it's a school board, superintendent, is the main one who keeps the system going. When at one time, when in 2006, we were at provisional improvement, and we only need a few points to make accreditation. So it took almost 10, 12 years to get back where we were. We went in and out and out. I have about 39 seconds left. What someone would say is this: I believe that the people who live in the community can govern that community better than someone who is appointed, because it's very political when you're appointed, because you can be removed just by a snap of the finger, but you have to be elected to, taken out to not to be on that board. So and your study include the personnel who have retired from the system.
We didn't explicitly include it. On the other hand, I know boards like, appointed boards like Philadelphia and Chicago, where retirees actually play quite a significant role in the school district. So I don't know that that issue is really a function of whether the board is elected or appointed. It has more to do with whether or not that board, either elected or appointed, has taken on that set of issues as a priority.
Mr. Jesse Todd,
Yes.
Lou Moy, and Susan Turk.
My concern is that we pay taxes. The kids pay, we're concerned about the kids, of course, but the people who talk about they're so concerned about the kids seems to have a problem, though, when you have 10% of the kids homeless. How that's concerned? My other question is, then you have hungry kids. In the evening, they eat breakfast and lunch, but then they go home hungry. The parents are hungry. Seems like they use all these, saying they're so concerned about the kids, but then we have what's mass incarceration where a lot of the parents are locked up, for example, with these long terms that happened even many years ago, especially black people. And then the state is doing this, the same state that has the parents in jail are the same ones taking over the school. Well, if the parents hadn't got those ridiculous amount of time for the same drug, nobody ever tested it, one form of cocaine versus the other, if then black people hadn't got that time, that kind of time, they would be at home helping their children. So when we talk about the concern of the state taking over, seems like that's more racism and taxation without representation. And one way it seems like you can correct democracy, make correction because you remove the people from office who don't represent their constituents. Isn't that one way of making a correction? My question is, isn't that the best, that's the only way, things like, of making a correction? And we've tried, for example, even charter school, which is a privately, which is a appointed school, but it's, the buildings don't, we couldn't be here tonight if we were in a charter school, they're not elected. So that's not a real alternative because you can't correct them. Like we can't correct the politically appointed board now. They don't have to listen to us because they can stay there, and so they're not accountable. Again, the only way, because we've gone to war, for example. Even in World War I, we say make the world safe for democracy. Korean War, they said that we were the model for democracy. Vietnam War, we said we were the model for democracy. Even the American Revolution was over taxation without representation. The question is, what are we teaching then, as a social studies teacher myself, what are we teaching when we tell the kids that we're democracy, but then we can't elect our own school boards? Then too, not only the school board, we voted as citizens in this city for a stadium.
Mr. Todd,
Okay,
your time is expired.
Last thing is we need an elected school board. There's no other alternative, and we pay for it, and we should have some voice in it. Thank you.
Lou Moy, Susan Turk.
Yeah, first of all, let me address this gentleman's comments, and I find that I'm mostly in agreement with how it is you stated the nature of the issues. And frankly, I rather think that our job in urban public education is to put the prisons out of business. That's what I think that we should be doing. None of us in urban education, at least anybody worth their salt, didn't get into this work to see our institution reflect, much less perpetuate, all the inequities that our kids face, much less the school-to-prison pipeline that you're beautifully describing. Our job in urban education is to make sure that our kids are well equipped to thrive in the world and be successful in the world, and put all of those prisons out of business. And we shouldn't be the pipeline for the prisons. We ought to strangle that pipeline in its tracks and get rid of all that. So I'm in accord with your comment.
Good evening.
Lou Moy, Susan
my name
Turk,
is-
and Service Chung.
My name is Lou Moy, and I'm president emeritus of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists, and also a 53-year member of the United Automobile Workers Union. And I just want to thank you for your presentation. It was so frank and to the point. And I really don't have a question, just a comment, because I have participated in all of the town halls. This is the third one, and I've participated in all of them, and I've listened to the presentations. And even before I came, I was pretty strong on elected boards. And after listening to all three of the presentations, I still feel that way. And it's very difficult for me to be on the side of history that says that the St. Louis community is not capable of electing a board that could govern our school system. And so that's very difficult for me. I don't want to be on that side of history to say that we're not capable of electing folks that could govern our system. And when we look at our current elected board, when we look at their education, their backgrounds, their qualifications, some are teachers, some attorneys, parents, etc., I believe our current elected board can serve and do what we need here in St. Louis that can govern our school system. And I'd just like to ask everybody to take a look at our current board and look at their backgrounds. Some of them have been active in the community for years. We got young people, some a little older than others. And I think that's what we need to take a look at, is getting behind the elected board, because the voters have spoken. We elected them last year. And so I think that's what we need to do, is look at them and see if we can apply some of your characteristics, if they could apply some of your characteristics to govern the St. Louis school system. Thank you.
Yeah, as I indicated at the beginning, probably over 80% of our school boards in the big cities are, in fact, elected. And I'm rather partial to elected boards because of all of the reasons that you indicate. That is, people in the cities are perfectly capable of electing people who can govern their own institutions just like everybody else can. At the same time, I also know that boards, both elected and appointed, but more often, more so elected, can get themselves into trouble because they let the politics of their positions get in the way, and they have a difficult time sometimes getting out of it. And I also know that in too many cases that the election turnout in too many of our cities is way too low. That is typically under 10%, and it means that people sometimes are elected. I'm not saying here in St. Louis, I don't know what the turnout here is. Well, that's great. But typically the election in many other cities is so low that people are elected by a very small set of special interests that feel then that that board member is beholden to them, and then that board member gets themselves into trouble because of that obligation to deliver to that set of interests. So I think all things being equal, An elected board is probably preferable to anything else, but that elected board has got to be bearing down on why it is they are there in the first place, and that is to make outcomes better for kids.
Susan Turk, Cyrus Chung, Bob Miller.
I would just like to say that every second Tuesday of the month for the last 10 years since the appointed board has been governing the district, the elected board has continued to meet. And tomorrow, the 14th of November at 6:30, the elected board, since it is the second Tuesday, will hold another meeting. I would like to invite all of you here who support the elected board to come to their meetings every single month. They want to see you. They need to see you. Everyone who is watching this on Facebook, understand that your elected board is elected to serve you. They meet every month. Tomorrow night it will be at Mann Elementary School, 4047 Juniata Street in Tower Grove Heights. Every month they meet in a different public school somewhere in the city. And you can come to these meetings. You can address the elected board the same way that you can address the special administrative board. Bring them your concerns. Bring them your support. I hope to see all of you there tomorrow night.
Sarah Chung, Bob Miller, Ebony Wilson.
Hi, I'm Sarah Chung. I'm a faculty affiliate at WashU's Brown School of Social Work, and I really care about community voice. I'm also the executive director of a local systems think tank that's focused on education. But though I'm affiliated with these entities, I'm really just coming as a resident of St. Louis with two tweens. They are 10 and 11 years old. And I've really just been trying to understand what's happening on the ground from a level perspective. So I really do appreciate tonight's presentation because I think you addressed a lot of the concerns that I had about either elected or hybrid boards. Like I said, I believe that St. Louis is a city where there is a need for representation from an elected board of community members, but I also see the need for more people who have an understanding of educational science and improvement. So it seems the deeper issue, like you said, is not about what is the composition of the board, but what are they focused on. So my question is, who keeps the board accountable in a hybrid situation where you have both elected and mayoral appointees? Who designs the strategy of how you get this elected board off the ground? What are the specific goals? So for instance, would there be more elected members than appointed members in terms of voting so that the elected board members would always have more influence than others? If we're talking about representation, are students represented and given a voice? I know this was something that was talked about in the very first meeting, and I think that's very, very important if we're talking about representation. And then who keeps everyone accountable from top to bottom, and will they be mandatory board training? I think you mentioned that earlier. And then if there are appointed members, are there qualifications needed for appointed board members? I just asked a bunch of questions, but I think these are all the things that I'm curious about, and who designs the strategy?
It's actually a great set of questions. The board ought to be designing its own strategy for moving forward, because it ought to be the board in combination with the superintendent that is setting the overall goal and defining the theory of action about how it's going to achieve its goals. Who holds them accountable is the public in the case of an elected board. You ask a question about the combination hybrid elected and appointed. It is a governance model that, frankly, I don't recommend at all, because it's really hard for a hybrid board that comes from those disparate backgrounds to come to consensus around what its direction is going to be and how it's going to pursue that direction. And even if they reach some modicum of consensus at the beginning, it often breaks down in pretty short order. So it is a model that I wouldn't propose, and anybody who has tried it almost always moves away from it in a year or so because of all the dysfunction that it creates. In terms of student representation, I'd say over half of the big city boards of ed have a student representative on the Board of Education. They come to that position in differing ways. Sometimes the combination of student councils will elect somebody. Sometimes it is a vote by the students. Sometimes students are appointed. Sometimes when the student gets on the board, they have a vote. In other cases, they may discuss an issue and even present regular reports, but don't have voting rights. So it's really all over the place. But I've got good data on this if the task force wants to see it. But I think over half of our boards have some kind of student representation on them.
Bob Miller, Ebony Wilson, and Bill Haas.
Yeah, I can remember back in the 30s and 40s and whatever. St. Louis City, University City, Normandy, whatever. They had an elected board and everything was going well. Academics was good, whatever, that's what we want. But then we started seeing this migration, racial thing. The minorities, the rich and the white, whatever, being moved out west on their own. Everyone poor being pushed north. Now we have these demographic concentrations of poverty people, low economic. It's a matter of demographics. It's nothing to do with the board, this elected board, or however the board is. They were elected back then and they're elected now, but when did these other than elected boards come in? After 30 or 40 or whatever years of failure because of this minority problem that we have. Then that's why these smaller boards, elected boards, 2 or 3, how are you going to get commonality out of 7, 10, 15 people? Well, and you mentioned if the superintendent can't work with the board, and the board really doesn't know anything about academics, they don't know what academics are all about. You threw these terms around, No Child Left Behind, ESSA, and they don't know what this is all about. They've got to work with the superintendent. And I would have to say that a superintendent that has 3 or 4 permanent members to work with, if he can't get consensus, well, how is he ever going to get consensus from 15 or 20 elected people coming and going based upon elections, which, as you said, are 10, 12%. How many parents do we have here tonight? I don't think anyone's here unless they're representing, well, maybe 1 or 2, huh? Otherwise, everyone's representing the... Okay, yeah, right. Otherwise, yeah. Okay, I'm supposed to believe that. But anyway, why do we see these other than elected? Because of this failure, and it has nothing to do with the board. Like you said, it's demographic, and if the superintendent can't work with the board, well, then the superintendent's going to move along. I've seen this happen in New York. I've seen it in Los Angeles. I've seen it in Chicago. And now I've seen it here in St. Louis. What?
30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. I see 22 here, 21. But anyway, the superintendent sets the policy, and, if schools are failing, they're failing because of ELA, English Language Arts, math, science. It's no space engineer required to know what they're going to have to do. They're going to have to improve academics. All right, thank you.
Ebony Wilson, Bill Haas, Susan Jones.
I'm Ebony Wilson. I wanted to just say that the superintendent, he's nothing without the students. He's nothing without the teachers. So let's not forget where all the power lies. Without the parents in the community, there are no children, and the children are the ones being educated, so they're the main factor here. I taught for the St. Louis Public Schools for 7 years. I'm a product of North City. I'm an educator in a charter school right now. I am a victim of politics in a district. So when you talk about politics, I experienced it during my maternity leave, and Mr. Adams already know. Ebony Wilson up here, you already know the situation. Okay, so I just want to say, do not take the power from the people. We as a community, African Americans, it seems as though we're losing all the power that we have. No matter what is going on in society, it's always some reason as far as power being taken from us. We can't vote. When we vote, then it doesn't go the way that it should go as far as the voting is concerned. This should not be an issue. For us being here right now, stating that there is an issue as far as seeing if it's going to be in hybrid or appointed or even just, just being elected, there's no other way than election when it comes to this. We have fought hard for an election. Do not take our power away. I have 2 kids that attend St. Louis Public Schools at Lexington Elementary. So I am a parent who wake up and send my kids to the St. Louis Public Schools every day. I am a product of the St. Louis Public Schools. I went to Cleveland, NJ, ROTC, made a lot of money for this district. So when you go and you ask the point of, should it be elected or appointed, we know how human beings are. Let's keep it real. We know that as soon as human beings get power, they lose focus. So as soon as you appoint someone, that's where the issue lies. Or they being appointed for what reason? When you mentioned previously that individuals it's easier when they're appointed to get them on one accord, it's not always beneficial. So we have to understand where the issue lies. We have to not take the power from the people. And we have to remember that power comes in the form of money. It comes in the form of governance over the numbers of people, and it comes in discriminatory factors as well. So that's all I have to say.
Bill Haas, Susan Jones.
Good evening. I'm Bill Haas, and I'm here tonight to explain to the task force and others how we got in this pickle. We got here by 15 years of lies by that white person's newspaper, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, about the elected school board of a predominantly African-American district, and here's how and why it happened, and I've been on the board since 1997, so I should know. In 2001, Fran Slay was elected mayor of St. Louis, backed by the Post-Dispatch. Then he ran his slate of school board candidates in 2003, also endorsed by the Post, and they won. They fired Cleve Hammonds. They hired the suit salesman from Brooks Brothers as their turnaround guy, Bill Roberti. They closed our 5th best performing elementary school, Waring, because SLU needed it to save $19 million to build their stadium, and things went downhill from there. They turned out to be the worst school board in history, taking the district from within 2 points of full accreditation to within 2 points of being unaccredited in 4 years, hiring and firing 7 or 8 superintendents, and sowing discord wherever they went, since they neither included nor respected the community. And in spite of this chaos, dysfunction, and bad management, the Post couldn't bring itself to admit that they were wrong about them. So you know who they blamed for that dysfunction? The elected school board members who served with them. We had only 3 of the 7 votes during those years and essentially no power. And when by 2007 the Slay people were voted off the board, those same people engineered the takeover of the school board, thus becoming the sorest losers in history. And you know who supported the takeover? Those same ninnies of the Post who supported the Slay slate. And they kept telling the same lies about what was wrong with the district and how it was the fault of the elected board. And that takeover would never have happened but for all those years of lies by the Post. And the editorial and news departments are still telling those same lies. So my question today is, what are we going to do about it? And I have the solution. I'm calling for us to boycott the Post advertisers until they remove the editor in charge of this disinformation campaign all those years, Marcia Koenig, admit the errors of their ways, and pledge to do better in the future. There are other villains besides Marcia, but she's been the main one that I've talked to for 15 years. So if you agree with me, we need to do two things. We need to start calling the Post advertisers and tell them we're not going to buy their stuff as long as they advertise in the Post-Dispatch until the paper stops telling lies about the elected school board. Call an advertiser a day for a month and we'll win. And we need to call two editors, Gil Bagnon and Ray Ferris, and tell them we're going to boycott their advertisers until they get rid of Marcia and meet with us to discuss doing better. And I talked to Congressman Clay last week, and he's with us.
Your time has expired.
Thank you.
Susan Jones, David Bolger, and Driver Henderson.
Good evening. I'm Susan Jones, President of the St. Louis Board of Education, and I'd like to remind everyone here tonight that as we are here to listen and give input regarding a recommendation to the SAB, do realize that the elected Board of Education doesn't have to rely on meetings as such, because we consistently attend local meetings and community meetings across the city of St. Louis while thoughtfully listening to our constituents during and outside of monthly board meetings. There is no number of flawed online surveys, Facebook comments, or emails that speak louder than the 26,000 voters that left their homes this past election to make a decision at the polls. For those of you who are not aware, the St. Louis Public Schools Foundation, located inside the SLPS district office, has held private meetings over the last few months with civic leaders and business leaders regarding the governance structure of SLPS. This entity has the sole responsibility of raising money for SLPS, but is also the same organization that has formed a committee to recommend a governance structure for SLPS. The governance committee, per the foundation's website, has expressed that the foundation's work and any recommendations will be developed independently by the board. The SAB and the SLPS Foundation share the same time frame of making a recommendation to DESE. You see, the district has been working double time behind the scenes to ensure that those who pay to play are represented and that those voters are marginalized. This is why parents are leaving and why we continuously fail our children. There are too many hands in the pot and too much politics being played with the futures of the city's most valued treasure, our students. To everyone watching, DESE has said for years that community support behind an elected board is what is needed for a transition to begin back to a fully elected board. If you have not tonight, please sign the elected board's online petition, write letters or emails to DESE, your elected representatives, the local newspaper, and the SLPS Foundation. Also, be sure to flood the future SAB meetings, elected board meetings, and tell all of your friends about the educational crisis here in the city of St. Louis. The links and emails for these individuals and entities will be posted in the feed for tonight's presentation. And in closing, please join the St. Louis Board of Education tomorrow at Mann School at 6:30 p.m. And also, please you can view our entire school board schedule on slps.org and on our Facebook, Board of Education, City of St. Louis. Thank you.
David Bolger, Driver Henderson, and Mavis Thompson.
My name is David Boger, B-O-G-E-R, and I would ask a question of our presenter. Does your organization ever rate the school systems according to some of their outside influences, like the churn rate? We have a churn rate of about 77% here in St. Louis, and Kansas City is perhaps quite similar. Expenditure per student relative to the city's living standards, and homeless student rate versus as a percentage of the overall school population. Wouldn't having those data for each of the school systems give you a better sense of which boards were truly successful and which boards were just lucky?
Yes, and we do collect it, and we do actually assess. We don't rate them, but we do collect the data, and we do analyze to what extent the school district and their performance has taken those factors into account. Almost every major city in the country has large numbers of homeless kids, and certainly the poverty rates in the major cities are substantially higher than they are elsewhere in the country. We have all of that data, including the per pupil expenditure numbers and the like, and we do use it to analyze which of our school districts have what kind of resources, what kinds of issues are they trying to overcome, and which school systems actually do a better job at overcoming the effects of homelessness and poverty and language and disability and the like. So yeah, we do. And we'd be happy to share any of that information. So the information on academic performance of the kids tends to be a little harder, but it's one of the reasons that we initiated the Trial Urban District Assessment of NAEP some years ago, was to see if we could get comparable student achievement data across state lines in all of our districts, and use that data alongside of homeless rates, poverty rates, mobility rates, disability rates, language status, and the like, to really do a more apples-to-apples comparison with how the school systems are doing. So we're not uncognizant of what it is you're bringing up, and we do have all of that data and use it to adjust our results to see which system is doing a better job than others. Does that answer your question?
It does. Mr. Gaines, I note that at 2 minutes, our presenter began speaking, and I would like to have just one minute.
If you have another question, please ask it.
The question before us is not which form of school governance is best. The question is, shall the people govern themselves? When the SAB recommends an appointed board or a hybrid board, the SAB is saying that the Revolutionary War was a mistake, that Reconstruction was a mistake, and that voting by citizens itself is a mistake because rich white people and corporations know better.
Driver Henderson, Mavis Thompson, and Jay Ozier.
Black Lives Matter. In this city, on this issue, your turnout is, in my opinion, swinging the tide for the elected board, and I look forward to their being back in power. President Gaines, my thanks and compliments to you. I think you've done an excellent job of leading the panel and leading us, the audience, on this complex issue. I recommend to Victor and Maureen that they take back to Jefferson City the strongest of recommendations, that their state school board and their DESE deliberations be open to the public and have the same kind of dialogue and input from the audience. The fact that they won't listen, they won't make provision, even a request for executive session, if it's a sensitive meeting, is declined, and it is hurting us. Question. It is on the DESE State Board of Education homepage that their next meeting will be here in St. Louis on November 30 and December 1. I guess Peter Hershen's resort in the Ozarks isn't available for the December meeting this year. Anyway, where in St. Louis we trust that will be open, and I'm wondering, do you know ahead of time now how much time will be allowed to this important subject? For your professional development and for part of what was missing, Dr. Kaserly, your presentation was outstanding, but strangely, until the tangential question about desegregation at the end, I heard nothing about racial relations or the complex difficulty in dealing with mixed population when it comes to education. You know where I stand, Black Lives Matter, but let me make four, if you're taking notes, write down 4 words. Students, love, reading, cultural differences, understanding. This is not just a numbers game, this is a heart game, and life matters. Center your thinking on the students, and of course the teachers and the parents. The fundamental of all parents, teachers,
Your time has expired.
is love. Reading is the best tool, and cultural difference understanding working for all of us as best possible. Apply the critical love and critical thinking toward achievement, fully closing the academic and achievement gap between our races. Thank you.
Mavis Thompson, license collector. Hold on, your mic is not. Wait a minute. Mavis Thompson has the mic.
No, I don't know where it is. I assume someone
We
here
don't know.
in St. Louis knows.
As it relates to your question, we don't know. If you could basically give that question to Ms. Godwin. If you will allow me to do this, if you would give your question to Ms. Godwin, and we know how to get in touch with you, we will make that we'll make it possible for you to know it. If I could finish, please. In addition to that, Dr. Adams, could we make sure that beginning tomorrow, sometime tomorrow, we put on the St. Louis Public Schools website when the DESE meeting is and where it will be held, if we have that, if we can get that information.
The DESE meeting is not going to be in St. Louis in November. That has been changed.
Mavis Thompson.
Mavis Thompson, M-A-V-I-S-T-H-O-M-P-S-O-N. I, Mavis Thompson, license collector for the city of St. Louis, write this letter in support of maintaining the elected Board of Education as the board governance model for the St. Louis Public School District. I personally thank the elected board for their commitment and passion for our school children during this period of transition. My rationale is simple: democracy. The current Board of Education was elected by the citizens of St. Louis according to the state laws of Missouri. Just like any other elected official, the elected school board members are accountable to the taxpayers that they serve. For the most part, they are reflective of the demographic makeup of the city and, in essence, a voice of the parents, students, teachers, and residents. In the purest sense of the word, democracy is a form of government in which supreme power is vested in the people and exercised directly by the people or by their elected agents under a free electoral system. Accordingly, to eliminate the elected school board would frankly result in voter disenfranchisement. There is no dispute that the appointed board is worthy of our gratitude for their leadership and service. However, the intent of the Missouri law is clear. in that when the governance of the special administrative board is ended, the school district shall, S-H-A-L-L, return to governance by the locally elected school board. Now let it be recognized that I, Mavis Thompson, who has the privilege of serving as an elected official, humbly request that the Special Administrative Board recommend to the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education that the power of governance of the St. Louis Public Schools be restored to the elected Board of Education. And I will be submitting my letter in writing. Thank you.
J. Ozier,
Yes,
Kathy Berry, and Wale Amusa.
I would like to reiterate everything that has been said, the importance of us being able to elect our own school board and they to be able to carry out the function that the law has designated for them. I did just want to say, because some of the ancillary problems that we have, and they're not particular to St. Louis, as pointed out by the speaker, they're all over the country. And one of them that always sticks to me is that we need jobs that pay a living wage. That's the best way to help stabilize a community. And that also ensures stable housing if you're able to maintain a job with a living wage. And it's been pointed out by several of the speakers, the influence of politics, but I'd say it's not just politics, it's business, big business. And they're the ones who created much of this problem where we ended up with a special administrative board based upon what Bill Haas was saying, where the businessmen, those who was elected, that we let our guards down and they was elected, the same administration on the school board. And their allegiance was not to public schools. It was not to public education. And so they brought in a business people who came in and looted over $50 million of our money, should be in jail. But again, I just want to reiterate again the importance of us being able to elect it and to have the transition team and the task force to understand all the points of everything that people have been saying about us having our democratic right to stand and rise on our own.
Katie Berry, Wale Amusa, and Justin Eidelberg.
Hi, so my name is Katie Berry. I spoke at the first meeting as well. I'm a city resident. I'm the parent, because there are parents here at this meeting. And I'm a former high school teacher, though not of a public school. So I have attended every meeting. I've learned a lot, and I'd like to thank you for coming down here and for being so honest with us. Some things I've learned today, or some things I noted while you were speaking, were comments like hybrid boards get themselves into lots of trouble because of the divided nature. They're consistently have difficulty finding coherence. I could go on, but I believe that's the gist. So after tonight, I hope that there's no question about hybrid boards and if we should have one or not, because it seems to me the person brought in, the expert brought in to speak for them has spoken actually against them, ironically. So then that leads us to elected versus appointed boards. And one concern I have with an appointed board, is who's doing the appointing. And one would be that if the governor is appointing, there's of course tension between the governor and St. Louis, and the politics of the governor and St. Louis are very different, and it goes back to that partisanism. An elected school board, of course, in Missouri, you're not running by party. So having partisan politics dictate the curriculum in my child's education, I would find concerning. One thing that when I did teach, I taught history, I always appreciated, it was at a Catholic school, that my principal never came into my classroom and told me I couldn't teach evolution, or that take it easy on the Catholics when you talk about Reformation. That was never said to me, and that was one thing I really appreciated. Knowledge is power, education is power, and I see in other parts of this country that power being taken from people in the form of not talking about unions and why unions happened in history, in the forms of our students and their bodies and what they're taught about their bodies. And so I just want to make sure that that partisan politics is not brought into our curriculum. I'd also like to note that there's been a problem with the governor and the state board, and that he is overreaching there, and 3 folks who he wanted to appoint withdrew their nomination because they were being strong-armed. So my question, when it comes to accountability, when you have a governor appointing or a state legislator making appointments, how are they held accountable? Because people in Joplin are not voting for governor based on St. Louis school boards.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's pretty clear that when it's a local mayor that is doing the appointing of a school board, that mayor is typically more accountable to the local folks. When the governor is involved in the appointing, I think it's also pretty clear that the governor is not as accountable, because particularly if there are partisan differences between the city and the governor, the governor may not feel like he has anything to lose necessarily in terms of his own votes or her own votes. So I think the issues of accountability are really quite different, if not non-existent, when you have state officials trying to appoint a local board. I think that's really a bad idea. It exists. You see it, you used to see it in Baltimore. They got rid of it just recently. You still see it in Philadelphia, but it's a practice that causes all kinds of political problems for both the city and the state. So it's one I frankly would not recommend. If it sounds like the vast majority of people in this room, anyway, are very much in favor of an elected board. If by any chance the commission would decide on an appointed board, I think it's probably wise not to have the state be the appointee if they went down that path. Does that answer your question?
Wale Amusa, Justin Eidelberg, and Kathy Sherwin.
Dr. Kessley, I want to extend to you first a great amount of gratitude for the very thorough and very balanced presentation that you gave here tonight. Please, let's give him a hand.
Thank you.
I have attended each one of these 3 presentations, and the one thing I can say is that about 99% of people that spoke, for the record, here at those various presentations have spoken very strongly, vigorously, and passionately for an elected board with the power to manage and control the affairs of the St. Louis public school system. It is important to note that for the record because I have done surveys before, and I know people that have done surveys, and I'm not questioning the integrity or the motives of anybody. We can make surveys say whatever it is we want it to say. But the one thing I can say is that people who have shown up here at those 3 events have all spoken almost unanimously for an elected board. The other thing I'd like to say is that it is clear, contrary to what the previous presenter last week did, and it really made me angry, I kind of went off. It is now clear that an elected board can provide just as much coherence with proper professional development and training and focus on academic achievement and other strategic goals, that such a board can provide coherence and continue to improve on the gains that have already been made. That is clear to me as an education consultant. Finally, I would like to make an appeal because I think it's about the next steps. And it doesn't have to be an antagonistic process. I believe more in a non-antagonistic process. I have a lot of respect for everybody that's in the task force. I've worked with many of them in the past, and I have no reason to question the integrity. But you are uniquely in a position where you can help decide whether the process is antagonistic or non-antagonistic by making a recommendation to the state to deal with the transition to an elective board that has been in place, that has been running elections for the last 10 years, because if you don't, the question I have for you is this: if not now for that transition, when? You are in a position to help bring this whole community together by graciously stepping aside and helping to facilitate the empowerment of those people that this community have voted for. Thank you very much.
Justin Eidelberg, Kathy Sherwin, and Lawrence G. Maxiner. Justin Eidelberg.
Yes, as Mr. Gaines has said, my name is Justin Eidelberg. I got a couple comments. I really ain't got no questions. First and foremost, I would like to know, why would you all bring this consultant in who is a part of something that you all are a part of the Council of the Greater City Schools? So you all didn't bring in a consultant that would have, you all said, bring a nonpartisan opinion, even though he has pointed out some good and bad things about what is going on here. I don't think that's fair that you bring someone that you all are lined up with, and I'm pulling this information from the Urban Indicator, the newsletter that came out in 2014. My second thing is, we're fighting over whether we have an elected board, a hybrid board, or a special board. What is the point if there's no accountability? There's no way for the residents to be able to come back to you all and say, we're not happy with what you all are doing. That does not exist in any form, shape, or fashion. And if we're going to go to an elected board, SAB board, hybrid board, we need to be able to have something that shows some accountability, because I came back to St. Louis Public Schools in 1994 from a blue ribbon school district, and when I came back, I got in trouble because I told them I would not do the work that they gave me, because the English books that I had in 9th and 10th grade, I did in 6th and 7th grade. So me, you can call it privileged or whatever, but I felt like, why am I doing this? I did this in middle school. So from that standpoint, when we had an elected board then, and what happened? When I came back to St. Louis Public Schools, I learned how to be a worker. I didn't learn how to be an innovator or to be a part of the 20th century working in industry. I learned how to sell crack because they did it in my schools. Guys sold drugs. That's not an opportunity to thrive. And everybody that I would assume that's up here, they want to see youth have that option. And you all talk about creating standards and creating mechanisms for people to thrive. How? When we have magnet schools, we have charter schools that separate the kids that have versus those that don't have anything. So what will you all do to incorporate that? We have, because we got Cortex here, we're trying to get Amazon here, we're trying to get everyone here, but the people that matter that are part of the region get nothing. They get to flip burgers, cut grass, and carry bags at the airport. What would you all do? What recommendations would you all make for the young people that are growing up in our city? Because I'm not going to say the region, because you can go to CBC and get a great paid education, while you get a public education that taxpayers pay for and we get nothing but poverty and disenfranchisement and pity projects. Thank you.
Kathy Sherwin, Lawrence McTiner, and Michael Person.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kathy Sherwin, S-H-E-R-W-I-N, and I'm here today on behalf of the St. Louis chapter of the Coalition of Labor Union Women. And I'm here and grateful for my education in the St. Louis public schools tonight, for sure. And I want to just reinforce the need to have accountable democracy and accountability, and so I want to speak up on behalf of the elected school board. Thank you.
Lawrence D. McTiner, Michael Person, and T. Smith.
Hey, and thank you all for your participation, Doctor, and thanks for getting my name right. No one ever gets it right. I am a product of the system, like a lot of people here, product of the St. Louis public school system, and I graduated from this institution in 1970. And something that was said by you, Doctor, you made some correlation between real low turnout in an election, and how does that, with the board caring. Well, my comment is, and then I got a couple quick questions. My comment is the lowest turnout in an election for a Board of Education is still a greater turnout than our governor, our mayor, or some group in Jefferson City or wherever voting. I mean, you got to get a real low turnout of like a dozen people in the city of St. Louis for the appointed board having a bigger turnout and being more representative of the voters of the St. Louis. Now, I'm sorry that there's not a bigger turnout in elections, but as I said, even the lowest turnout is more representative than the appointed board, no matter who appoints them. And by the way, and I'm just going to be snarky, but I do not see our mayor here tonight. But where is her representative? And she will, if they let her, she will get to appoint someone, if they let her. Now, I don't know. You know,
Yes,
I'll bet my life there's no representative from the governor's office here tonight.
Just to clarify a point, Donetta Clinkscale is appointed to the SAB by the mayor. She is not here. Donetta Clinkscale.
Singfield?
Clinkscale.
Oh, Clinkscale, yes, sir.
She is appointed by the mayor. She is not here this evening due to a personal situation. The governor's appointee.
I don't see Mr. Cassis here tonight.
The governor's appointee is Mr. Rick Sullivan, and he is right back there in the back.
Oh,
and
yes,
he is
I
appointed by the
recognize you. I
governor.
recognize you. I stand corrected. But once again, in support of democracy, the lowest turnout is greater than whoever appoints an appointed board, hybrid board. Thank you very much.
Michael Person, T. Smith, and Megan Betts.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Person. I am the committeeman for the Ferguson Township. I do have some previous experience as a director and as a treasurer of a Riverview Garden School District. With all due respect to the panel here, all distinguished, a few of them are personal friends and so forth. Glad to see you here. I'm a little dismayed as to the process of how you got here. I understand that our appointed board got these people together. I would certainly like to know what criteria they used to choose these folks here. I'm certain they didn't choose them based upon whether or not they were or whether they were not in favor of them remaining in power as the appointed board. It was not a transparent process for them being here. That being said, with all due respect, as far as I'm concerned, this is a farce. Whatever they say, whatever opinions, and whatever we say here, they're going to do what they want to do anyway. DESE has not proved itself to be pro-education. When I was on the school board of Riverview Gardens, and we had a lot of kids who came to our district that were underprivileged, underserved, underfed, so forth and so on, DESE took it upon themselves to accuse the school district itself for being a lower performing school district, not taking into account that we have this influx of underprivileged, underserved demographic from the city. Eventually it became unaccredited, and a board was appointed to take over that $100 million budget and not be accountable to anybody in our community as opposed to whom they thought would be good for trash service or toilet paper or books or what have you. They were accountable to nobody and could do whatever that they wanted to do or whatever DESE wanted them to do. Now, Ms. Wright, she's no longer there, but I don't expect any better behavior from Mr. Trammell. When she was there, she of course sent all of the students from to Normandy from, I'm having trouble remembering what the name of that district was. Wellston, thank you very much. Thank you. Sent Wellston there. And of course, we know what happened to Normandy School District. They became unaccredited. They asked Ms. Wright, you think that was a good idea? Well, I don't know, maybe it wasn't a good idea. DESE has proved itself to be nothing other than a thinly veiled administration which has nothing on its agenda other than to destroy public education. I mean, certainly Guyton is not somebody who's going to make the school district any better. I mean, he took $131 million out of
Mr. Person,
education.
your
Was that going to help anybody?
your time has expired.
When we get done, you're going to do what you were going to do, and we'll have that appointed board still there. Thank you.
T. Smith, Megan Betts, and Theolin Sedgwick. T. Smith,
I'm Megan Betts. I don't know about.
T. Smith, Megan Betts.
Hi, my name is Megan Betts. I just want to, as someone's talked about parents here tonight, I have a stepdaughter that's a freshman at Metro. I have a second grader and a third grader at Gateway. They were formerly at Washington Montessori. And I have a first grader at Sticks Elementary who was formerly at Columbia Elementary. Just a background with my children in schooling is that my husband was born and raised in St. Louis. And so we had always wanted to send our kids to SLPS and purposely send them to schools on the north side, which is where we live. Over the years, and my daughter, we've been with SLPS for 5 years. So that was during SAB time. It has been a struggle to keep them on schools north of Del Mar. We knew that we could apply to have them go to schools on the south side of the magnet schools, which were a little bit better at the time. But it was a decision that we made that we felt that we lived on the north side. Our kids should go to schools on the north side. This year was the first year that we openly pulled my son out of Columbia and had him go to Sticks. And the difference is night and day from what we saw at Washington Montessori and what we saw at Columbia. Columbia is transitioning to a gifted school. I would encourage everyone to go visit and see what it's like. I'll just say this, we have a very long way to go when we talk about accreditation with our schools, because as a North City resident, I didn't see it over there. I do have some questions about the online survey that's going live tomorrow. Oh, it's live now. Okay, the online survey that's going live now. Who is able to use the online survey, to take this survey? Anyone? If my family lives in Wichita, Kansas, would they be able to go online and do the survey?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
So for the online survey, my question is, how are we making sure that it's for stakeholders who I would consider parents, City of St. Louis residents? Is it anyone can take the online, who can take the online survey?
The survey will be available to anyone who chooses to take it, but there are certain questions on it that will identify things such as where you live, your zip code, things of that nature, so that we can basically be sure that that survey addresses issues that are, in some cases, universal to the area, but without question, local to the city itself.
Okay. And how much of that survey, how much does that weigh on the decision?
There's no specific weight to any part of it. You may not have been here when Ms. Godwin attempted to explain. There are about 4 different parts of the process. This is one part of it, where people come in, listen to the presenters, listen to the questions that come from the panel, ask questions themselves. This whole thing is being live streamed. You have ways, if you do not feel comfortable with making a public statement, there are people who will we have a court reporter outside who will take your statement, or you can actually write on an iPad outside what you'd like to have known or what you'd like to say. Additional to that, we gave out a telephone number that you can call that is specifically dedicated to this issue of governance.
So just as someone that ran for an elected office on the north side, and that found that a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is pretty much electronic. We're talking about, there hasn't been like advertisements on TV. I don't know if you put an ad out in the St. Louis American, or if there's been any other way of form of this getting to the people that really, really, really need to have their voice heard. Because as someone, like I said, that ran, the only way to reach every single person was probably a mailer or knocking on their door. And short of that, you're not going to get the input that I think you should have. So I'm just concerned, like, was there thoughts about a mailer going out? I mean, it seems like we've had a lot of time for that to happen. And with the $80,000, I think there should have been a portion of that budget that went to something like that to truly, truly engage the residents. Is it too late for that? And that's all I have.
Steele and Selleck, if I'm mispronouncing that. They do not indicate anything other than their name. Frazier Busky. Bosky. Okay, Bosley. Frazier Bosley.
Hi, how y'all doing today? All right, my name is Lakeisha Frazier Bosley. I have a few comments as well as a question. These meetings and panel discussions are to appease the people. The speakers that have been invited to our city to speak on something we have already spoken on. You want us to trust in a system that has failed us too many times, and the fact that we are a democratic city in a Republican system, and our governor, who is blatantly against us, has already cut $86 million from our education budget, and has appointed 5 members of the Board of Education already to have majority vote over our educational district. But to make a people feel like they are a part of something, then to say, let's show you something to hopefully help change your mind. No, it didn't change our minds. We still want an elected school board. This made us more heated and ready for what we said we wanted in the first place. The elected school board who we have chosen under the reign of the SBA, SLPS have already had $50 million allocated and redirected from our district to charter schools. The desegregation tax that was passed in 1999 was for the SLPS and ended up in charter schools in the first place. Why do we have to take from one to give to another? Give the elected school board a chance to do their job that they have bravely and humbly signed up for and patiently waited for over 10 years to do so. The SAB came to help, you did your job. Thank you. That now it's time for you to go. So, to the member of the task force and the SAB member, Mr. Gaines, now that you have heard us for 3 days and hours say that we want an elected school board, what is we want? What is your recommendation today?
If the question is directed to me,
It's directed to everyone.
well, we haven't formulated a specific recommendation. I don't know if you were here when Ms. Godwin spoke to you, but we are collecting data. This is one part of the data collection process.
But in collecting
In
data,
addition to this portion, we will also be doing an online survey. And just as I mentioned to the last speaker, there are a number of ways that we're collecting data so that we help formulate our recommendation to DESE. Everything that is collected during this process will accompany what our recommendation is to to DESE, in it, as well as the recommendation to us from this panel.
so in that recommendation, as of you've heard us for 3 days say that we want an elected school board. I understand that you've taken data. You've been taking data for 3 days. You should be able to correlate something to us right now that says we're agreeing with you or we don't necessarily agree with you.
I understand your sentiment. However, you're a little early with that. We do have a survey that goes out to 10,500 people. We have been very serious about the counting of the number of people who have come here. There were 262 people who were here on last Monday. There were approximately, I think, 100 and 200 on Thursday. We're not quite sure of the numbers here this evening, but they will be somewhere approaching 100. So that you would have an understanding of just one part of this. Live streaming on the first Monday was 1,600 plus people. On Thursday, last Thursday, live streaming was 1,300 people. We don't know how many people are live streaming this. Aaron Conahan.
Hello, I'm Erin Cunahan. I am a resident in the 6th Ward, and I serve as pastor at Oak Hill Presbyterian Church, which is in the 15th Ward. And most importantly, I'm a parent. I'm an SLPS parent. I have a child who is a student at Roosevelt High School. I came here tonight hoping to be convinced that the hybrid board might be a good option for us, but our esteemed speaker tonight made it clear that that is a bad option. Parents, teachers, residents, and elected officials have been coming out to these very long meetings, and we've all been listening to all of these presentations, and we've listened to all of your questions, and hopefully you've heard some of ours. And we keep saying we want an elected board. We want a say in our children's schools and in their opportunities and in their education and in how we get to spend our money to educate them. One of the main issues that came up tonight was on board accountability when things get off track. You spoke about appointed boards being better at self-correcting, but I just wanted to point out that we in this city have recently become real good at holding our elected officials accountable. And we do so in the streets and in the voting booths. So I have confidence that if our elected board gets off track, parents and residents can and will demand accountability. I've been listening to these meetings and I keep waiting to hear something new, something persuasive, and something substantial to show me that there is a better model other than giving parents and community members both voice and vote. I have not been convinced. And I'm frustrated with these meetings because we've been here for hours and hours, and I really do appreciate your all's time. You guys are serving willingly, and I appreciate that. But I'm frustrated that we keep having the same conversation. We all know that the state doesn't take over rural white school districts, just urban districts full of students of color, parents of color, and voters of color. We all know about the money and politics and racism moving behind this decision. So you hear the people that are showing up to these meetings, you hear these community members, you hear these parents, you hear these educators. We want a vote, we want an elected board. We want an elected board. We want an elected board. I understand that this task force has a process, and I understand that you all tonight do not make the decision. And so my question is, how long is it going to take for you to make your recommendation? And when exactly do you plan to tell DESE that it's time for an elected board here in St. Louis?
Just to speak to the process part of the question, we anticipate that we will, by the second to third week in January, once all of the information that's come in, the survey has been done, has been tabulated, presented to the task force. They make a recommendation to us meaning we are the Special Administrative Board, and by the second, it is our hope, the second week in January, we will make a public recommendation to DESE in terms of what we believe the future governance of the school system should be. Along with our recommendation will be all of the information, what has come out of these sessions, what we have gotten from these surveys, what we have gotten from live streaming, and the other ways of data collection that are being used. You might notice we had the president and owner of Vector, who is charged with the responsibility of doing this, doing the tabulation, the data research, and the data accumulation, and then writing for us an executive summary to summarize what the data says. Everything that we get will be made available on the SLPS website, which we indicated when we started the meeting this evening. But that's the process. That's the one we've chosen to take. We believe it's a very open process. We believe it will get information back to the parties that it needs to get to. But our recommendation will be a summation of all of the things that I have just mentioned. And the date we have set is the second week in January.
I got a student that's real good at math. She can help you with those numbers if you need it.
Okay. Jam or James, and we cannot quite read the name, and there's no other qualifying information on it. Charles Murphy, teacher.
Democracy only works if we work it. Democracy only works if we work it. 10 years ago, could Susan and Donna stand up? 10 years ago, the three of us and about 17, 18 students and a few more people, we sat in the mayor's office. This is the 10th anniversary of that sit-in where we fought to keep our accreditation. And I want to salute them, and I want to salute my students from back then, because they wrote a song. The song was called It's All About Democracy. It kind of went like this. It's all about democracy. It's all about democracy. It's all about democracy. It's all about democracy. Please do not be mocking me. It's all about democracy. And that's what they sang. We just took it all over. And then it seemed like they still didn't listen. because they took our accreditation. And even back then, the superintendent we had, now me and superintendents, we kind of get along, especially the ones that care about students, all right? And the superintendent we had back then was a white woman. And the press asked her, well, aren't these students supposed to be in the classroom? And she told them, some of the best education takes place outside the classroom. Shut them up. So I'm here on behalf of those students because I still got them. You know what? I'm a 73-year-old teacher, black male teacher, and I've been doing this for 50 years, and doggone it, every time I try to retire, y'all start messing with my students. I can't go nowhere. And by the way, 10 years ago, you talking about the streaming we doing tonight? 10 years ago, we were streaming. My students, we were streaming from the mayor's office. And that system that tonight is streaming this and been streaming this, put together because of the support of our superintendent right now, our students perfected that. And it's working right now, streaming. And unions, my daddy was a union man. And that's why I'm here, because I believe in them. And I gotta say this, 2 days ago, I was in Pearl Harbor. And I saluted my father, because he fought in that war. But he was a cook, just like Dory Miller was a cook. And they wouldn't let us touch no guns. But Dory took that gun and he shot down folks. And my father put that spirit in me. And I can't leave my students. But I'm gonna be here to fight for democracy because that's what they would do. Thank you very much.
Before the last speaker, panel, I'm gonna ask you to stay about a minute so we can have a debriefing on a few things about next steps. Our last speaker this evening is Mr. Bruce Franks. Hold on, we have another one. I'm sorry, Lucinda Frazier. I'm sorry, Miss Lucinda Frazier. Oh, there she is there. Mr. Franks, you'll be the next and last speaker.
Mic check. Mic check. First off, I'd like to thank the task force for all the work that y'all put in. One thing I want to say is I got a lot of respect for Mr. Pearson. But one thing I disagree with, a wise man told me, unfortunately, the thought that nothing will happen is the most powerful thing. And so we're not willing to accept that they already made their decision. We're not going for that. A lot of the things I was gonna say have been said already. One thing I wanna say to you though, Mr. Gaines, is you've done a great job of dodging a lot of these questions. You talk about the representation from the mayors and the governor's office, but those were different administrations that appointed those folks. We got a new administration in now. And they haven't been here. They haven't been represented here. One other thing that was brought up, a wise man on the panel told me that we should look into the legislation. And so I looked into the legislation, and I agree. There's no time limit. There's no time stamp on when this should happen. So as a legislator, the parents and all the supporters have my word that me and other legislators that have been talking this past week across the board will support making that legislation work to bring back the power to our elected school board. But just in case that don't work, I share the sentiments with my sister. We know how to hold folks accountable. And so we've protested, In Ferguson, we protested 400 days straight, even when the cameras left. We're still protesting the Stockley verdict, and we'll continue to. But if we protest for that, we damn sure gonna protest for our kids. So we urge you, we demand you to make the right decision for the people, because you keep talking about this data that you collected, but you didn't have to do these to collect data. You don't have to put that online survey to collect data. You can look at the 26,000 votes. That's enough data to collect right there. And that speaks to the need for us to have control of our school board. We have local control of our police, so we damn sure should have local control of our schools. And if we don't get it, we will shut shit down.
Mr. Mr. James Clark.
Hi, I am Lucinda Frazier.
Lucinda Frazier.
Committee woman of the 3rd Ward and also Vice Chair of the Democratic City Central Committee. And the word Democratic, basically you talk about surveys and task force and all those things of that nature. The city of St. Louis, the people have spoken. We want our elected board to be in front of the St. Louis Public School. I don't understand why we have to go through surveys, why we got people that consultants and task force and all of these things that you all talk about. It's like you all don't want to, you have the power and you don't want to turn the power over to the people. We have the power. We have voted for the people that we want to represent the public school system. I don't understand what is hard about that. It's nothing hard about that. So at the end of the day, we, the people of the city of St. Louis, have voted to whom we want to represent us and the public school board that we voted in. We have the power, not you all, not the governor's board. You need to listen and understand that. You all don't have the power. We have the power, and we're asking you all, as Bruce Frank said, if you don't give it back to us, guess what? We're gonna take it. It's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. It's no task force. It's no data. It's no consulting firm or anything like that. We voted to whom we want to represent us. It is nothing hard about that. Come on, guys. We tell the kids to do the right thing. So why are we, it's hard for you all to do the right thing when we're teaching our kids? We have the superintendent right here, which have did an excellent job of making us accreditation. The teachers of the St. Louis Public School have done an excellent job of getting our accreditation back. And we tell the kids to do the right thing every single day. So now you all telling us that you all can't do the right thing, or that's what? You all don't want to do the right thing. But we have voted to whom we want to represent us at the St. Louis Public School System, which is our elected board, period. Thank you very much.
That's it. James Clark. James Clark.
My name is James Clark, James. James Hedman Clark, Hedman-Clark. My phone number is 314-532-4521. and I live at 8276 Albin Avenue, St. Louis, Missouri, 63114. I would like to compliment all the speakers tonight. The government doesn't let me out much because well, I'll be honest with you, I know too much. You all have been misinformed about 90% of the primary reason the state took over the board. Don't take this personally, and I'm wasting or taking up my time. I did have a 3-minute speech, but after listening to you all, I said, I need to speak up. But this has nothing to do with academics. Educating a student has to do with money. It has to do with intellectual property. Getting to what I wanted to speak about, or my questions pertain to when the state took over the district in 2007, they brought with them insurance policies that previously the district hadn't even conceptualized. One being the all-risk property insurance policy. Y'all should look into that. I've tried to get copies of it through Sunshine Law requests, but 5, maybe 6, I haven't received nothing but a bunch of paperwork that had nothing to do with what I requested. And the state also brought with them a school board management liability policy. Third, they brought with them an excess workers' compensation policy in addition to the workers' compensation policy that it had already brought with them. Now, the premiums for the all-risk property insurance policy, that's a very rare, extremely rare insurance policy. Premium, the district's paying, I think in '07, they paid $658,000 for the premium. It's gone up to as much as, I gotta hurry. It's gone up to as much as $860,000 to get to the all-risk property. They have protection for over $1.4 billion worth of assets of the St. Louis Public School Districts that perhaps they own or they have an interest in. None of this has been discussed anywhere, but you should look into it. The School Board Management Liability Foundation, look into it. My question to you all is, if the elected board takes over next year, will they renew the all-risk property insurance policy, the workers' compensation, and the School Board Management Liability Foundation? If you add it up, they're spending over $1 million a year, times that by 10, I believe we're at about $11 million they spent on insurance policies that prior to the takeover, they weren't paying for it. Will they continue paying for these all-risk property and management insurance policies? We're talking $1 million a year. I think the district could do a lot with that money. I was an employee for the district for 2 years until I invented the perfect behavioral system, and then I was fired. And I haven't had a job since then. In fact, apparently the government thinks I'm unemployable, psychologically and physiologically. Well,
Mr. Clark, your time has
up.
expired.
Thank you, Mr. Gates, for your time. I appreciate it. If anybody has any questions and would like to hear the facts, I have them. Thank
In
you.
answer to your question, partial answer to it, all insurance policies are either bidded out or renewed every year. There are no policies in force that have been placed in force in the last 10 years that were not in force prior to the Special Administrative Board taking office.
That is true. However, when Lashley and Bear was the attorneys for the district, it was June 17th, 2007, when the first all-risk property insurance policy was brought in, which came in with the state, and that was prior to 10 years ago.
Okay, I would have a different opinion of that. Having served on the school board from '83 to '89, all of the same policies were in place then. Lashley and Bear I've worked with them for years as it relates to the school district. I would simply say that is not quite the way it happens. and those processes are open to the public in terms of what's done. We would
Wait,
like
can
to
I-
thank so much.
Can I respond to just what you just said?
We would like to
Please.
thank you so very much for coming to the last of the public sessions. The next steps will be, as we have, as Ms. Godwin has explained at the first part of the meeting, we will begin the process of working with the survey that went live this evening. And we, again, thank you for your participation. And please stay tuned for next steps. Thank you, and good evening.
And thank you for the invitation.
Oh, let's thank our presenter, please. I am so sorry. Thank you.